I have to close the door?
Yes, please close that door. Okay, so when I was talking about the rocks being placed specifically to keep you off something, I'm talking about like this and the guiding tape. So just be mindful if it looks like we've piled rocks intentionally. We probably have. We just want you to stay off of that area. So before we head too much further into the cave, a little bit of history. The history of this side of the cave begins in 1957-58. The gentleman who owned the other entrance of the cave decided he wanted a second entrance to take tours through. So he and a couple of employees started traversing the cave looking for an entrance that people could use. They never really found an entrance that people could use. What they found was a crack that they could hear an airplane overhead through, and that told them that that crack went all the way to the surface. So they went back to the other entrance, grabbed some supplies, came back, and they dug out the entrance that we use today. So that was just a crack in the ground that they widened to make the entrance it is today. And tours begin in 1960 on this entrance of the cave. DNR purchased the property in 1988 and has run the tours since then. So as we move through the cave today, there's a couple of different clues within the bedrock and within the fossil record itself that can tell us the history of this area's past. And there's clues within the bedrock and the cave that tell us how the cave was created in its history. So pay attention to the walls and stuff, and we will discuss those clues as we go to look at the patterns that tell us. Yeah, so there's an employee in here. So they will look at those patterns and discuss what those clues tell us. So we're going to go a little bit further to 17-layer rock, and then we'll talk some more. Right, sorry.
No.
Okay.
But it was good too.
All right.
Still in a couple of things, but.
He's fixing the cave?
No, he was just looking to see if there's something we could change a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh.
So.
You
Carl
mind the cave, actually?
Tyler will probably tell you the cave was formed by water, but.
Nope, formed by you.
That's right.
You're the manufacturer.
Jake's been down here for like 80 years, just working away.
This is
17-layer rock.
17.
17.
Oh.
Yep. So this 17-layer rock came off of the wall, actually, right back here. So.
Okay.
Now, that's a pretty big chunk of rock come down onto the floor off of the wall over here and stay intact. So as Jake was joking, it is our first clue as to how the cave was created. This is a flood maze cave, and all of the sections we're going to walk through were created by flood waters. Okay, and the reason that this rock managed to stay pretty intact once it hit the ground is because this passageway was either full to the ceiling or close to full to the ceiling when it came off of that wall, and so it slowly kind of settled down to the ground when it was full of water and it came off of the wall. Okay, so we're going to see a couple more rocks that are really large that are going to continue to tell us kind of how the cave was created, because they're going to be sitting pretty fairly intact in different spots. And for the only way for that to happen after falling off the ceiling is to have done, something to have cushioned its fall. And that water is what does it. So it is considered a maze cave because it is 13 miles of dead ends. It is Minnesota's largest cave system, but that's also why you take a tour. So, turning our attention back into the past, the rock around us, as I mentioned, it's the rock itself and the fossil record can tell us the history of Minnesota's land. Okay, so we're in the Stewartville Formation, and in the Stewartville Formation we have limestone and dolomite. And that tells us some pretty important things, but the fossil record also tells us important things. And what I want to point out first to talk about the past here is all of these holes in the wall that you guys have probably noticed. Most people are familiar with fossils, which are the shells and bones of creatures left behind. This is a trace fossil. Trace fossils are things like footprints, nests, poop, burrowing wormholes. These were all burrowing wormholes back when this bedrock was sediment. So limestone is a sedimentary rock. So it starts out as something like dirt, mud, sand, piles up, compresses into the bedrock you see. And back in that time, which we'll talk a little bit more about, these were burrows from worms in the sediment. Okay. So that's our first clue as to what the environment was like back then. We're going to move a little further. We'll see some more evidence of the river that came through the cave and some more evidence about what this landmass was like when this was just sediment, okay? So we're headed this way.
So with the 17-layer rock which you have, as you say that layers grow as in the age goes in, so was it the age of the cave as well measured or anything?
No, it's just called 17-layer rock because it's got 17 layers. It just has layers of bedrock in it. That's why we call it that. It's just a descriptive name. It's not a scientific by any means. So.
So you have literally by hearted the route map here. How many times have you gone through the cave?
I wouldn't be able to count how many times I've been through the cave.
How was your first time when you had been here?
I was here intentionally to work, so it was my boss taking me into the cave and taking me through it. So I don't know. I was trying to learn all the information I needed for our tours at the time, so it's hard to say. It was interesting. It was awe-inspiring, but it was work for me. So.
You see the ceiling. What are you looking at the ceiling as well?
Because we were debating if there's a fossil on the ceiling. I don't know that it is. I don't know that it is. So. We were just talking about it on the surface, and I was trying to see if I could tell where a coworker was talking, but I don't know.
So you're basically hunting the fossil right now.
Well, we walked past where he thought he saw one, so, and I didn't see one. I didn't really see what he was looking at, so. We'll actually stop right here because I do want to talk about the creation of the cave first. So we talked about how it's a flood maze cave, and another clue we have actually happened as we were walking through the cave. So you guys probably imagined floodwaters potentially filling the cave and then up to the ceiling. And that's not quite right on this side. So as we were walking, you might have noticed that there's these ledges and then dips and then another ledge. And some of them are more pronounced than others. The river that carved this passageway actually started at the ceiling. So every one of these ledges and then the dip, the ledge was the floor at one point. Okay, so we saw some rocks on the ground back there, and they're rather large, and the passageway would have been with water in it, which would have cushioned the fall of those rocks. But we also saw some on the ledges, and we see some on this ledge especially. Rather large size, so at one point, that was the floor when they came off the ceiling. And they came off up there, and they kind of floated down and settled. We didn't put them up there. So the river started at the top and then just wore its way down through the passageway. And if you look here, you'll see there is a ledge right here. So the reason I point that ledge out is because the river that carved out this side of the cave, this is 500,000 to 1 million years old. So at the point that it was carving out this cave, the river came over this way. Currently, the river no longer comes this way. It's changed its path. It is still technically over by the main entrance, and it still influences that side of the cave. That side of the cave still floods to this day. In fact, that is why we're all parked outside right now.
I was going to say, I bet
under
it
the
flooded.
canopy. Yes, last weekend it flooded. And it's actually not the flooding that caused the problem and why we're still doing tours over here at this time, because the cave is empty. It usually empties on that side within 24 hours of flooding. We had it cleaned within 3 days. The flooding was so severe this year, it ripped up the driveway at a bridge you have to drive across. So they're having to repair the driveway. That's why we're stuck over on this side right now. We can't use the other entrance for tours because of that. But the river just doesn't come this way anymore. So it stopped at this level. Had it continued through here, it would have continued to wear this path down further and further into older bedrock. But again, that doesn't happen anymore. Now, before we talk about our second piece of evidence of this environment, when this was all sediment, I do want to acknowledge these are still worm burrow holes in the wall here. There's some over here too. What's happening here is that there's iron in this level, and so instead of the inside of the worm burrow hole eroding faster than the outside is or the opposite is happening, I believe is what's happening. So we've got the burrow holes sticking out of the rock.
So they still have the worms in?
Yep, they still have the burrow holes from the worms. It's just that they're sticking out of the wall instead of the wall sticking out. So now, our second piece of evidence of what this environment was like is actually a fossil, and it is right here on the wall. Now again, soft tissue does not fossilize very well. So what you're typically seeing is the shell or bone of a creature. Okay, so this is the cut through of the shell of the head of a cephalopod, an armored squid. We're missing the head, the tip of it, and then we're missing its face and its arms. Okay, so that is a marine creature. I'm sure you guys all know what squids are, and all of our fossils that we find are marine animals. The worms were marine animals also. So that tells us something about the environment when this bedrock was being created, but the actual bedrock tells us the same story. What a lot of people don't realize is that limestone is calcium carbonate. So the sediment that creates it has to have a large amount of calcium to create limestone. And what most people don't know is those sandy white beaches in shallow tropical seas everyone loves to vacation on, those are actually the tiny particles of little sea creatures and corals. That's where the calcium comes from. That is the only sediment that I'm aware of that can create limestone on the earth. So that, and the fact that everything that's in the cave is a fossil, is a marine mammal, tells us that Minnesota was a shallow tropical sea at one point. Before you go picturing Minnesota and the middle of the United States as a shallow tropical sea, not quite. The rock around you dates to over 450 million years old in the late Ordovician period. And during the Ordovician period, North America was not where it currently sits. It was south of the equator and was a smaller continent next to a supercontinent. And part of it was underwater as a shallow tropical sea. Over time, because of continental drift, it drifted slowly up north, and now it's cold. But at one point, it was a shallow tropical sea. So evidence within the bedrock itself, as I said, and the fossil record tells us a lot about the environment. The lack of fossil record or the bedrock and what is left in the fossil record tells us stories also. This is the Stewartville Formation. Right around 450 million years old, maybe a little before, we're going up in age to the Dubuque Formation, which is a little bit younger. And when I say a little bit younger, a little less than 450 million years old, right around there, okay? So when I'm talking younger, I don't mean like our age.
Way old.
We're going to head up to that section. We're going to go up that slope. Take your time going up the slope, but if you can and you have good enough footing, pay attention to the walls around you. We're going to actually talk about what the changes in the bedrock and the fossil record tell us about that time frame, okay?
Okay.
Anybody got any questions?
No.
Okay, here we go.
But why didn't we light up the whole cave like the normal way of LED or any other form of source rather than...
So the lights actually cause disturbance in the cave and can do damage. So our first entrance, which has been open since 1937, has seen a lot of disturbance, so it is lit up. But this section only started tours in 1960. So the DNR decided that this side of the cave, this section of the resource, didn't need the lighting because we were offering it on the other entrance, and there was no need to cause such a disturbance. So there's no lighting on this side. But again, if you go to the scenic tour once it's reopened, there's lighting over there.